She's ready.
Howdy, everyone. Sorry. Okay, I'd just like to remind everyone to please silence or turn off your cell phones at this time. Thank you very much.
You ready? Good morning, or good afternoon. I guess it is by now, isn't it, right? Well, it's my pleasure today to introduce Wendy Davis, who's come and given us the honor of speaking to us today. She's an attorney, author, former Texas State Senator, former City Council person, and the 2014 Texas Democratic Gubernatorial nominee. Although, as you can see, she's still young, her public service career as an elected official has spanned almost 3 decades. She graduated from TCU, first in her class, and went on to graduate with honors from Harvard Law School. She is widely recognized as a leader on women's health care policy and is best known for her historic 13-hour filibuster in the Texas Senate to kill a legislative effort that would have dramatically reduced women's access to abortion care services in Texas. And I'm just sorry to see that she's not wearing her pink sneakers today. Wendy Davis has played a leadership role with considerable success on many important public policy fronts, including her efforts to secure passage of the Texas Equal Pay for Equal Work law, championing economic development through the use of public-private partnerships, spearheading transportation efforts in her region and throughout the state through the use of innovative funding mechanisms, forging compromise between the oil and gas industry and local communities to allow for the capture of vital minerals while respecting quality of life, water, and air, working with financial institutions and public utilities on important consumer protection legislation, championing efforts against voter suppression, and advocating for victims of sexual assault, passing legislation to clear a backlog of over 20,000 untested rape kits. Noted for her talents as a legislative leader, in 2009, Ms. Davis was named the Texas Legislature's Rookie of the Year by Texas Monthly Magazine and Freshman of the Year by AARP. She was named to Texas Monthly's Top 10 Best Legislators in 2013 and has received numerous awards, including the 2013 Women Who Dared Award by the National Council of Jewish Women, the 2013 Champion for Social Change Award by the Texas Association Against Sexual Assault, and the 2011 Legislative Star by the Texas Classroom Teachers Association. In addition to her many public and civic duties, she is an attorney and still maintains her corporate-based law practice representing several major entities, including DFW Airport. So it's my pleasure again, and let us all give a big Texas A&M howdy welcome to Wendy Davis.
All of y'all. It's so great to be here with you. I love coming and speaking with young people who are exploring the opportunity to become the next great change makers in the world. And that's what you all are doing. Every one of you, when you came to law school, I'm sure came with the desire and the promise of doing something impactful in the world, which is wonderful. Let me grab my clicker here. So think about the shoes of others that you've stood in your life. You've probably all done this, right? I know that my girls did this. We tend to want to stand in the shoes of people who we admire. And my girls certainly stood in mine when they were little, exactly like this. I am very grateful that their feet got to be bigger than mine because I don't think I'd have any shoes in my closet if they hadn't. These, of course, are some shoes, the dean just referenced them, that a lot of people associate with me. And they really tell a story about who I am. But before I wore those shoes, I had many life experiences that formed the person that I became standing in them on the day that I stood in them on the floor of the Texas Senate in June of 2013. Sometimes we need people to stand in our shoes and advocate for us, and without people doing that, we simply wouldn't have a voice. This, of course, is the suffragette movement. We just celebrated a few weeks ago the 95th anniversary of the passage of the 19th Amendment, which gave women the right to vote. But it was men who had to decide to pass that and move that constitutional amendment forward. It took men with the capacity, the capabilities, the understanding of what it meant to women not to have the opportunity to express their voices at the most important place that we speak, the ballot box. Now, legend has it that, and this is true, there wasn't a single vote to spare in Congress in determining the passage of the 19th Amendment. And there was a holdout whose mother literally had to call him and say, "Don't plan on coming home for holiday meals if you don't vote in favor of this amendment." Even today, we can see examples of the importance of what it means to stand in the shoes of and fight for others based on experiences that we may have learned about. I just read an amazing book, which I would recommend to you, by Brian Stevenson, called Just Mercy. It talks about his experience as a new baby lawyer. He's not a baby anymore, he's actually my age. But his legal experience of fighting on behalf of people who were wrongfully convicted and who were on death row, people who were serving terms, sentences for things that ought not to have had the length of sentence that they have, a person who learned to fight for others and to stand in their shoes and to become an advocate for people in need. When I think about what's going on in the Black Lives Matter movement today, I can't help but think about the fights that Brian Stevenson has engaged in. Most of his clients, as you can imagine, who are either wrongfully or serving prison sentences that are extremely out of proportion to their crimes, are African American. And Brian, if you read his stories, will, I think, help you form a better understanding of why this movement not only is so important, but is so powerful today. And it asks each of us, me, a white 52-year-old woman, to stand in the shoes of Black lives who are being impacted by a criminal justice system that sometimes is meting out anything but justice. You may recognize these folks here. This is the Earl Warren Supreme Court. And what do you notice when you look at this a little more closely? Look at their shoes. They're all men. They're all white. They're all kind of old. Earl Warren, of course, was the Chief Justice of what's called the Warren Court. And if you've had any constitutional law classes yet, you know, of course, the impact that the Warren Court had in so many important decisions, not the least of which was Brown versus Board of Education, which desegregated our public schools, and of course, the decision that allowed biracial marriages as well. Earl Warren actually became the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court in an interesting turn of events. He was the governor of California. He was extremely popular in the Republican Party, and he was toying with the idea of running for president in the 1952 presidential election. Eisenhower also was toying with that idea, and there was a negotiation between the two of them. If Warren would step aside, if he would agree to deliver California's delegates to Eisenhower at the convention, then Earl Warren would be given the first opening on the U.S. Supreme Court if Eisenhower became president. Well, he did become president. Of course, the rest is history, but that opening occurred much earlier than anyone thought it would. In 1953, when Fred Vinson, the Chief Justice of that Supreme Court, died suddenly in the middle of the night, Earl Warren was called and told that he had a seat open. Now, what Earl Warren made Eisenhower commit to was that he was going to be given the Chief Justice's seat. And the argument that he made was, you promised me the first opening on the court. And the first opening was the Chief Justice's seat, and I will take that seat. Thank you very much. Now, later on, Eisenhower was to say that appointing Earl Warren to the Supreme Court was one of the worst decisions he ever made. I happen to think it was the greatest thing he ever did. So Earl Warren, of course, was instrumental in that Brown versus Board of Education desegregation suit. You probably know that he was able to pass that with a unanimous vote. And when you think about those 9 white men who made that decision against the backdrop of a country that was not at all ready, particularly in the South, for a decision of that magnitude, it makes you wonder, who were they? Who were these 9 white men who had the capacity to put themselves in the shoes of this little girl? This is Ruby Bridges, walking into school on the first day that Louisiana finally complied with Brown versus Board, which was years after the decision came down, and unfortunately having to be accompanied by U.S. Marshals as she did that. Earl Warren was able to put himself in Ruby's shoes to understand why an equal education was so important to her and to children like her who were being denied it through a separate but equal system that was in place and that was anything but equal in this country. But what was it about him that gave him the ability to do that? Earl Warren, this old white guy, raised rather conservatively, it was primarily this experience. Earl Warren was the Attorney General in California when FDR issued the order asking or ordering that citizens of Japanese descent be interred into camps during World War II. Because California was the place where the highest Asian population was, Japanese population was, it became the center of this interment. And as Attorney General, Earl Warren was tasked with carrying out that order. He later wrote in his autobiography about the impact that touring those camps had on him. When he saw the consequences of a decision that he had helped to employ, the human indignities that he saw, women and children who had been separated from loved husbands and fathers, the pride of a Japanese people who found themselves in prison for no reason other than the fact that they were of Japanese descent. And it created an impact on him that stayed with him forever. And it formed a very important part of who he became as a Supreme Court judge. When he was appointed to the Chief Justice position, Brown versus Board was already pending before the court. And with Earl Warren's vote, he could have immediately moved the decision out on a 5-4 vote. But he knew that because it was so controversial, he needed a unanimous decision from his court. And what Earl Warren systematically did over many months was to engage with the 4 would-be dissenting justices and to tap into and find a way for each of them to find the capacity to step into Ruby and other Ruby's shoes and to unanimously decide that significant decision. This, of course, is Justice Anthony Kennedy, much more modern-day person. And I know you all know about the very significant case that he just signed as the majority opinion author in the Obergefell case. What was it about him that created his capacity to write that opinion, to step into the shoes of people with whom he, on the face, didn't have anything in common? He was actually raised very conservatively in an Irish Catholic family. What was it about him that made him form the capacity to empathize with, to relate to consider the words that he wrote here. They ask for equal dignity in the eyes of the law. The Constitution grants them that right. Again, this idea of dignity, his deep understanding and empathy for the dignity that we each deserve, regardless of our backgrounds and regardless of our orientation. And many people believe that it was his friendship with this person, Gordon Shaber, who was the dean of a law school that Justice Kennedy taught at when he was a young lawyer. Gordon Shaber was gay. These two men had a very profound friendship that lasted many years. Unfortunately, Gordon Shaber did not live to see the Obergefell decision. He died a few years before it came down. But many believe. There was no doubt Justice Kennedy's deep friendship with Gordon Shaber that helped form his ability and capacities to be able to step into the shoes of the Obergefell plaintiffs and so many others whose dignity he had in mind when he wrote that majority opinion. Sometimes we find ourselves standing in the shoes of people with whom we would never choose to stand. These two women, I'm sure, would tell you that that is the case for them. Robbie Damlin and Bushra Awad are from Israel and Palestine. And of course, as you can imagine, they come from a place of bitter conflict. But they share something in common now, and that is that they each lost a beloved son to that conflict. In their shared grief, they formed an amazing friendship, one in which they've come together trying to seek an ability to find real change and to help be a part of a peaceful resolution to that conflict. When I heard them speak about a year ago in New York at the Women in the World Conference, I couldn't help but notice their shoes. Each is wearing black and white, and they were, at the time, black and white Converse tennis shoes. And they were asked a question about those shoes the day of the conference. And what they said was that they are the uniform attire, the uniform footwear of the 600 families that are in the Family Circle Parents Forum, which is a group of families of Palestinian and Israeli descent who have each lost a loved one to the conflict there. Their shoes, not only a figurative but a literal symbol of the fact that they each are now wearing and standing in each other's shoes. So of course, again, those shoes that I put on back a couple of years ago as I ran out of my apartment that morning and deciding at the last minute that my little flat shoes that I had on were probably not going to provide enough support. But before I put those shoes on, I wore many others. And I, of course, also deeply understood the shoes that came before me. This is my grandmother. My grandmother was half Native American, and she understood the double sting of racism and poverty. She had only a 6th grade education, my grandfather only a 4th grade education. And they married when they were 13 and 15 years old. They eloped to Arkansas, where folks that young were allowed to marry without a parent's consent. When she was 15 years old, she returned to Texas wearing low-heeled, very sturdy leather lace-up boots that she had borrowed from her mother when she eloped to get married. And with them and in them, for many years, she and my grandfather worked very, very hard. They ultimately had 14 children, 12 boys, 2 girls. My mother was one of the girls. And they were tenant farmers. They traveled all over Texas, California, and Oklahoma, finding work where they could and always farming other people's land. Interestingly, they bought their first house when they went on Social Security. because it was the first time that they'd ever had a stable enough income to actually qualify to buy a home. This is my mom with my daughter Amber, who is now 33 years old, so a long time ago. My mom in her orange and white Brahms ice cream and dairy uniform. My mother grew up working unbelievably hard, as you can imagine, in a farming family with 12 brothers and only 2 girls. She knew what it was like to stand in her older brother's hand-me-down shoes, and she stood for hours every day cleaning house, making sure that their denim was clean, that the food was cooked. And when she was a newly divorced mom, she went to work for only the second time in her adult life outside of the home, armed with only a 9th grade education. And as a consequence of the fact that she was not well educated, her job at Brahms was really about the best that she could do. She raised 4 children as the sole financial support for us on her Brahms earnings. And what I remember about her was how hard she worked, how many nights, how many weekends. I remember this orange and white uniform. It is permanently emblazoned in my mind. But more than that, I remember her shoes. Orthopedic, they call them comfort shoes. And of course, in those she stood for hours and hours and hours. And when my mother would come home at the end of the day and put her swollen feet up on the sofa, what I understood about her was that she knew that for as many days as she was going to be able to envision ahead of her, this was going to be her future. But my mother was working to make sure that her children were going to have a brighter future than she was. And then I, too, became a young, single mom. Yes, this is the real color of my hair. Actually, it's gray now. This is my daughter, Amber, again, when she was about a year old. When Amber and I were living in these days, we were struggling. I was going through a divorce. I had a high school education, but that was it. It didn't look like college was on the horizon for me. I was working a full-time job and a part-time job, and I still struggled to keep the lights turned on, and sometimes I didn't succeed. And it was pretty scary. And I know the experience of what it feels like to be going through the grocery store line and having to put things back because you don't have enough money. I know the experience of how scary it can feel to not have a road ahead of you that looks like it's got anything hopeful on it. But it was my entree to the community college that I went to, Tarrant County Community College. It was Northeast Campus, was where I started, that changed my life and changed my world. I started to become a paralegal. I got the dream of actually becoming a lawyer instead of the lawyer's assistant. I got a scholarship to TCU. And as the dean said, I ultimately graduated from Harvard Law School. But there was something else that made that future possible for me. It was a Planned Parenthood clinic over on Henderson Street here in Fort Worth that made that my life story to tell. Because if it hadn't been for that clinic, where I received the only health care that I got in about a 4-year period of time, I likely would have faced a second unplanned pregnancy. I likely would have been completely derailed from my ability to walk that path that helped me pull myself up and out of poverty. So you can imagine when you think about the things that I've fought for in the Texas Senate, why it is that I've had 2 filibusters. One was on education funding and trying to stop $5.5 billion in cuts to our public schools. And the other was fighting to make sure that women continue to have access to reproductive health care of their choice. So that brings us, of course, to you. The shoes you have on today, the stories that your shoes tell about you, your capacity, and I'm sure you've all developed it, to put your feet into the shoes of other people with whom you have something in common, but on the face may not look like that at all. The great thing about your generation is that you uniquely, much more so than my generation or the generations before me, you are uniquely concerned about doing something of value in the world, of making a mark that is important, of doing something bigger than yourself. You're not just wrapped up in having the nicest house or the kids and the 2 cars and all of that, although of course that's important to you. But equally important is your impact on the world, and it makes you really such a treasure. What I love about your generation too is that you speak up and speak out when you're upset about something, justifiably so. If you look at this slide, up on your right-hand corner there, the young woman carrying the mattress, that's Emma Sulkowicz. She was a student at Columbia University where she was sexually assaulted. And when Emma reported her sexual assault to the school authorities, she was dismissed. Her case was not handled with anywhere near the justice that she felt it should have been. And she became very upset, very angry, and decided she wasn't going to take it literally lying down. She picked up her dorm room mattress where the sexual assault occurred, and she carried that mattress with her every day until she graduated around her campus at Columbia University. She took it to every class she went to. She took it to the student center when she went to lunch. And her point in carrying it, of course, was to say, see me. Think about what happened to me. Do not ignore the injustice that I suffered. What a profoundly brave thing to do. And what she was asking was for the people who were around her to put themselves into her shoes because they simply could not ignore what had happened when they saw that mattress everywhere she went. Down on the bottom right, your bottom right, stand with Sadie. In the foreground there is a young woman named Sadie Hernandez in her early 20s. She spoke out recently when she became very upset as she looked at the Texas legislature's budget, which sought to, and successfully did, cut breast cancer and uterine cancer screenings from Planned Parenthood clinics. Now, this decision didn't have a personal impact on Sadie, but what she knew was that it had an impact on women where she came from, the Rio Grande Valley, where health centers had been closed in 2011 with budget cuts, where access to that kind of health care was few and far between. And she took it upon herself to stand in front of the governor's mansion for over 2 weeks, asking that he veto that part of the budget and asking that he consider and think about the women who were going to be impacted by it. What a brave and incredible thing for her to do. Here on your left, the Black Lives Matter movement, once again. What you notice when you look at this picture are that the people who are carrying the signs, not a single one of those faces is African American. But the movement has been successful enough that young people like you have decided that you're going to step into the shoes of people who are impacted by racial injustices, and you're going to speak up and speak out and do something about it collectively with the people who are personally impacted. Each of those photos, a great example of what it means to be in your generation and how powerful each of you are. Sometimes you even get involved in political elections. And this, of course, a photo from my gubernatorial election last year. This was actually at the UNT campus where we had just an incredible, enthusiastic turnout. And this, a great representation of the power of what it means to express our voices. This is taken from the day of the filibuster in the Texas Capitol. The Texas Capitol on that day had to be closed for the first time in its entire history because it filled to capacity. Because thousands of people, some, in fact most, on the spur of the moment, hearing about what was going on that day, got in their cars and drove from all over the state to come and to speak up and to speak out about what they felt was an injustice to women across our state. Now, the great thing about the involvement of people exercising their voices that day is that the outcome would have been entirely different if they hadn't shown up. Because it wasn't me that successfully carried our filibuster over the midnight deadline. It was actually the thousands of people who came, women and men, who wanted to speak up, who insisted that their voices be heard. And if you know anything about the way that evening went, at about 11:45, when the lieutenant governor finally called for a vote, the people who had been sitting respectfully and quietly in the gallery of the Senate chambers all day rose because they had watched as rules had been bent and broken to accommodate ending the filibuster and passing the bill, and they rose, and they literally cried out. And they kept screaming and shouting in the face of DPS officers removing as many at a time as they could. And because of them, the Secretary of the Senate was not able to take a voice vote, and the bill ultimately, and only temporarily, unfortunately, failed. But it taught me something, and I think it taught a lot of people who were there that day what it means to engage and how powerful our voices can be. Now, many of the people who came may not have ever had an experience with the kind of reproductive health care that we were talking about, but they may have known someone who did, or they may have had an experience and they knew that another woman was one day going to be standing in those shoes and they were fighting for her. Again, the power of standing in the shoes of other people and using our voices to make change. So imagine what might be different if we all spent a little more time doing that, putting our feet into the shoes of other people and thinking about how we can use our voices to create an impact for them. I love this photo. This is Emma Sulkowicz again, with her mattress again, which she carried across the graduation stage, if you can believe it, at Columbia University. But what I especially love about it is that this time she's accompanied by some of her friends who are quite literally sharing her burden, who have stepped into her shoes and who are helping her in her final moment, the last moment that she would carry that mattress on her campus. So imagine the power that we would have if we talked or thought about putting ourselves in the shoes of other people when we face election times. If we were motivated enough in every election to care enough about the issues that were part of those elections, even if they didn't impact us personally, to make sure that we go and exercise our voices at the ballot box. What might happen if we actually decided to get motivated enough to become the candidates, not just the voters for the candidates? And these are examples of two young people who did just that, both of them who serve in Congress. So you remember that picture. What is different now? 3 women on the U.S. Supreme Court now. 3 women who have brought their own unique experiences of what it means to be a woman to the perspectives and opinions of that court. I can't imagine how this court would be different, how different our decisions might be right now had it not been for the addition of those three women and the shoes that they stand in. Now, when we think about millennial turnout, it ought to be something that alarms all of us, and I'll tell you why. So if you look at this graph, this is presidential year turnout. This is when, purportedly the highest enthusiasm for voting occurs. And when you look at the yellow line, which is the millennial turnout, and you compare it to the blue and the purple line, what you see is that by the percentage of millennial population versus the percentage of older folks' population, you're getting outvoted pretty dramatically. So it ought not to come, or not ought come as any surprise to you that older people are dictating the policies, the thoughts, the attitudes of so many of the candidates that we're hearing from in the presidential election today and what we've heard in the past. You're not necessarily hearing them talk about the things that are of concern to you because, quite honestly, they don't think you're going to vote and they don't think they need to be accountable to you. So imagine what might be different if you engaged. It gets even worse in mid-year or midterm elections, those non-presidential elections like the gubernatorial race of last year, where millennial participation drops to literally almost nothing. When I see this number, and even when I see the over 30 number, I can't help but think about how hard so many people fought to have the right to vote. The right, not the privilege, the obligation, I think, the ability to go and express their voices at the ballot box. How many lives were lost, how many people were injured, how many incredible fights occurred to be granted this most precious of our constitutional rights. And it makes me sad when I see the fact that so few people give respect and esteem to those before us who fought so hard. But here's the good news. Millennials right now are 20%, or in 2008, they were 20% of the total voting population in this country. By 2020, which is literally just around the corner, the next presidential election that we'll have, millennials will be 40% of the eligible voting population. Imagine the difference that could be made if you voted en masse in this 2016 election and presidential candidates in 2020 knew that, by God, they better be talking to you about the things that you care about and the policies that you want to see advanced because they know that you literally would be able to make or break their success as a candidate in that election. That's what using our voices is all about. That's what taking our feet and putting them into the shoes of other people provides us with the capacity, the impetus, and the passion to do. And I hope that each of you will own your incredible power, that you'll consider it with pride, that you'll exercise it in a way that says, even if I don't succeed when I vote for this person, even if that person fails, I'm going to keep expressing myself. I'm going to keep supporting and pushing for people who identify with the things that I care about until I see that we've actually collectively been able to make important changes. So here, of course, are some Texas A&M millennials already in action with the American Constitution Society. Obviously, many of you who are members of that group and who understand the incredible power of your voices and have tremendous respect for what's happened through constitutional decision-making in this country. As you consider the power and the importance of your voice going forward, consider this. In the next election, whoever becomes president is likely to appoint possibly even 4 Supreme Court justices during their presidential time. We have 4 justices who are over 80 years old. And when you think about the decisions that have come through the Supreme Court, the balance of power, and the fact that sometimes minority voices are only ever heard, recognized, and given respect is through Supreme Court opinions, please understand how important that next president's appointments are going to be, and I encourage you to engage. Thank you so much for being bright, thoughtful, caring, committed, and dedicated people. I know that you each have the power to do extraordinary things in the world, and I look forward to being an observer who one day hopefully votes for some of you as you decide to use your power in the political arena. Thank you very, very much. Thank you. Hi, thank you. So nice to meet you. Thanks, Dean.
Howdy, everyone. Now, Senator Davis is going to remain for your questions here in just a minute, but I'd like to take the time to personally thank the Dallas-Fort Worth Lawyer Chapter of ACS for helping us put this on, in particular Jason Steed, who could not be with us, unfortunately. Some of you may remember him as the gentleman who did the Supreme Court review earlier this semester. I'd also like to thank Senator Davis for coming and Deb Barnett here at A&M, and just remind everyone that we have some great events coming on later this semester, including an event on internet privacy and the right to be forgotten, as well as another Supreme Court review going on later this semester as well. And just remind everyone that if you like what we're doing, if you're interested in getting involved, you can join ACS at acslaw.org. And I also like to introduce Jay Forrester of the ACS Dallas Fort Worth Lawyer Chapter.
Thank you, Neil. I like to talk in the front and without a microphone, so I'm going to try that out, if that'll be okay. But if you can't hear me, just let me know, and I'll step over here. Again, I'm Jay Forrester. I'm a board member with the ACS DFW Lawyers Chapter. And before I say a few words, I want to say thank you again one more time to Senator Davis, and if we could all
Thank you.
one more round of applause. The words we heard today are so important. And to me, one of the biggest takeaways I have is that sometimes we just need to show up. And I want to thank each and every one of you on behalf of ACS for showing up here today. I'm an attorney at Lee & Brazil in Dallas, where I have my dream job of representing employees. I got this job because of contacts I made and the decision I made as a law student to join ACS. And so I'm here today to plead with all of you and let you know that ACS is here because we want you. I'm constantly impressed every time I go to events in Dallas, not just Fort Worth, but Dallas. The A&M students outnumber the SMU students and the UNT students 2-1. Yeah. Thank you all. Thank you all for your energy. I made the decision to show up a few years ago at an ACS conference in DC, which ACS paid for, by the way. I made contacts with a student at UT Law that eventually led to my current job. If today's event wasn't enough for you, and you haven't been to an ACS event before, when you leave, I want you to go to acslaw.org and learn more about this organization. If that's not enough for you, then on November 17th, because I know you all come to Dallas anyways, I want you to join us at SMU's campus this time, when we're going to have a panel discussion featuring Fifth Circuit Judge Greg Costa and Northern District of Texas Judges Lynn and Haran. If that's not enough to get you involved in this organization, I don't know what is. And if by that point we still haven't sold you on ACS and what ACS can do for you, and probably what you can mean for this organization, just get involved, show up. As we just heard from Senator Davis, find whatever that is for you. Thank you all again for coming today.
I don't think we have mics. So. think we have mics, so just.
Oh, I think we can hear. Yeah, this is a small enough space. Thank you. Does anybody have any questions? Yes.
I just want to know, first off, my name is Mitch Monty.
Hi, Mitch.
For you during your election.
Thank you.
I just want to know what's next for you.
I'm traveling and speaking a lot, primarily to women's organizations about the state of where we are, not only in reproductive rights, but economic rights as well. We have a long way to go to realize full equality for women, and it's something I'm very passionate about, and I want to keep working on it, even though I'm no longer in a policy-making role anymore. I also am working to start a new initiative that's aimed primarily at millennial women, encouraging them to be more engaged and to own the power that they have in these conversations, particularly if they care about the state of affairs in women's equality, and to understand that we really can create change if we'll all get involved in making sure that we do it. Yes.
Senator Davis, thank you for being here. I wanted to thank, I know a lot of students got involved last election cycle, not through ACS, but with Battleground Texas, and some election protection work. So it was a great introduction to election law for a lot of us, and an opportunity to get some pro bono hours. But actually, speaking of what you're doing next, I read something online recently about a TV show coming out. I think the quote was that this person, loosely based maybe off your experience, now releases her inner badass. Is that
Yes. So this is in the pilot development stage right now with Universal Studios and NBC. And the story would be about a woman, coincidentally, whose life is a little bit like my own, who's lost her gubernatorial election, who has exhibited passion as a policymaker, but also has struggled with what it means to be in a large-scale political arena where some of those passions get quieted as a consequence of polls and public opinion and trying to be a good candidate, and being freed from the constraints of all of that to fight from her core for the things that really matter to her. And she does it with her legal hat on instead of with her policy hat on. So I hope you'll watch for it. If it successfully goes forward, it will start in the fall of next year. Yes.
Given how low voter turnout was in the 2014 election,
Yeah.
do you think it should be up to legislatures to use legislative tools to increase voter turnout, like what Costa Rica has done, mandatory voting, or do you think that the onus should still remain on our generation and just Americans in general?
I think Americans should own their responsibility to vote, but I also think that we could be doing two things to increase that turnout. One would be to remove impediments that are in place. And we are currently actually putting more impediments in place. And if you've been watching what's going on with the voter ID law in Texas, you know that even the very conservative Fifth Circuit, in reviewing that voter ID law, has made a determination that it did have a discriminatory impact in violation of the Voting Rights Act. There's no question in my mind. I was in the Senate when the bill passed. I fought against it very, very hard, that the absolute purpose behind that bill was to disenfranchise people. No question in my mind, though the argument, of course, is made that it's to prevent in-person voter fraud, which is virtually non-existent. I mean, your chance of being hit by lightning are greater than that. And the court has seen through that. I was a part of the trial at the district court level. I helped to lay the foundation, the record for it as a senator by asking that certain amendments be adopted, which were turned down. And I expect and hope that the US Supreme Court is going to find, as the Fifth Circuit just did, that it does violate the Voting Rights Act and that it has suppressed the votes of low-income people primarily, which of course tends to have a disproportionate impact on people of color. We've also seen and it's happening in Alabama right now, but it happened in Texas first, a roadblock put up in terms of access to Department of Motor Vehicles to be able to get the kind of voter ID that you need. We've seen roadblocks put up that say you can use your concealed handgun photo to vote as a valid photo ID, but you can't use your university student ID as a valid photo to vote. In the trial, Texas admitted that at least 600,000 people would be disenfranchised when that law went into effect. And the November 2014 election was the first time that it was in effect before the Fifth Circuit had its recent ruling. And there's no question in my mind that not only did it dampen people who otherwise would have come, but it created further confusion about whether people had the entitlement to vote, the credentials to vote. And what I've learned about voting is a lot of people feel intimidated by it, and if they think any roadblock is going to be there, they just don't show up. So it has a further dampening effect. Other states we see doing extraordinary things to try to do the other side of the coin, and that's the second thing that we should be doing, which is making it easier, not harder. In California, their governor just signed a law that is going to, every time someone goes to DMV to get a license, they're automatically going to be registered to vote. Other states have same-day voter registration, so that if it's election day and someone comes up to me on the street and said, do you know there's an election going on and you can still vote, you can sign up, register to vote, and vote on the very same day of the election. There are other states like Oregon where, and I think Colorado does this as well, where every single registered voter is mailed a ballot, and they can vote by sending in their mail-in ballot. And that, of course, addresses a situation that a lot of people have who are working and can't make their time and make their way to vote. So there's a collective group of actions that we could take, I think, that would dramatically increase turnout. But I also think we've got to start focusing more on educating people about the power and the privilege of voting, starting in our high schools. A lot of people don't vote because they're intimidated by, I'm going to show up and I'm not really going to know what to do. And so they just don't go. And it's because we're not teaching it as just a normal, ordinary part of what we learn when we're in school. And I think we've got to make some very real changes in that regard too, just to make people feel comfortable with it and to understand why it's important. Long answer, sorry, but you just got me going on something I really care about. Anything else? All right, oh yes.
You're all for the empowerment of women and women equality, so how are you feeling about Hillary possibly making it to office?
I truly believe that Hillary is going to be elected. I hope I didn't just jinx her by saying that.
Maybe knock on the table.
Yeah, let me go knock on this. I don't know if y'all saw the other day, but Governor Abbott congratulated the Astros for winning the series. And then they lost the game because the game wasn't over yet when he did that. So I'm very superstitious about such things. Now, I think she demonstrated it last night, I felt, if you watched the debate. Of all the candidates on either side of the aisle, I feel like she offers the breadth of experience and the knowledge and understanding to be a truly great president. And it doesn't hurt in my mind that she's a woman. I wouldn't support her simply because of that. But I also believe in the value of making sure that when we look at elected offices around this country, we see ourselves in them. Young people see young people in office. People of color see people of color in office. Women see women. It's important that we see that so that we learn to believe that that's something that's possible for us as well. And I hope that every little girl in this country will have an opportunity to see Hillary Clinton in that seat and to believe that she can be president one day too. Yes, Neil.
You were telling me earlier today how you had clerked with one of the professors here at A&M, Professor Penrose. So I was just thinking, how have personal relationships influenced your legal career or even political career afterwards?
Well, Meg helped me stand in some other shoes, actually. So I was telling Neil this story. Professor Penrose, I apologize. I can't believe I'm calling her Professor Penrose. She and I clerked for Judge Jerry Buckmeyer, who was just kind of an institution in Dallas. He was really remarkable. He passed away a few years ago. He was a federal district court judge. He decided the opinion Baker versus Wade, which was a supportive decision. I think it was an anti-sodomy decision. It was some sort of an equal rights decision for LGBT. And of course, it was overturned by the Fifth Circuit, but he was way ahead of his time. This was like back in the 1980s, I think, 70s maybe, when he decided that. I came from Harvard, tends to be a fairly liberal place, as you know. Meg came from Pepperdine, tends to be not so liberal, as you know. And I was really surprised that the judge paired us, because the judges have literally the pick of, you know, several thousand resumes that come into them. They interview, I don't know, 12, 20 people to figure out who their 2 people are going to be. And most of them try really hard to get people who are going to be, you know, compatible with each other, because they're going to work really closely with this person for the next year. Well, Meg and I, don't tell her I told you this story. I know y'all are going to tell her this, but Meg and I went to lunch like the second day of our clerkship. And as we're eating our sandwiches, and keep in mind that at the time I had 2 young children, Meg says to me, in all seriousness, I don't think that women who have children have any place working outside the home. I thought I was going to choke on my sandwich. And this was the beginning, as the saying goes, of what actually became a beautiful friendship. I think she was really just trying to get a rise out of me, and if you know anything about her as your professor, I'm sure she does the same thing with y'all in class. We came from 2 very different backgrounds and perspectives, but I learned a lot from her, and I hope she would say to you that she learned a lot from me too. I adore her. She's really special. Anything else? All right, thank you so very much for spending your lunchtime doing this. Thank you.